As a proud supporter of Parkinson's UK, the Focus on Why podcast is supporting this charity by including their Time for Can campaign in this episode.
Can't work, can't walk, can't taste, can't talk, can't move, can't eat, can't remember, can't sleep, can't finish, feel ashamed, can't smile through the pain, can't stop the voices, can't make it stop. Parkinson's, the fastest growing neurological condition in the world. There is no cure. Yet we can fund, can fight, can discover, can unite, can transform, can live, can change, can give, can slow, can stop, can reverse, can cure. We can do, but we can't do it without you. Parkinson's UK. Together we can find a cure. Donate now at parkinsons.org.uk.
Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Today, I am joined by Jeffrey Shaw on the Focus on Why podcast. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you, Amy. I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, we've been introduced by Lee Hayes, and I'm very grateful to Lee for bringing you into my world and vice versa. So let's see where this conversation goes.
Eager to see where you're going to take this.
So currently you are a small business consultant, and I'm assuming that it's not you that's small.
That's interesting. I've never looked at it that way. But my business is small in that, it's like a lot of us. I'm kind of a team of one with a substantial virtual team. But yeah, that's who I care. I care about small businesses, particularly self-employed businesses. That's the name of my podcast, The Self-Employed Life. And I like to help the small businesses that, it's our life, and when you're a small business, particularly when you're self-employed, there's no division between your personal life and your business life. And that's rarely talked about except amongst those that know that experience. So that's why I try to take a holistic approach to business. And that's why my book, my podcast, everything is called The Self-Employed Life, so that we can talk about all aspects of it that influence our everyday experience in business.
And your podcast is pretty substantial. How many episodes have you recorded now?
I think we've broadcast about 645, have recorded a couple dozen beyond that. That's where I was a few months ahead in recording. And it's been 6.5 years. And as a fellow podcaster, there was no long range plan for this when I started it in 2014. And even today, I wonder, does it ever stop? Like, I don't know what I got myself into, because when I started it in 2014, it was it was a personal challenge, sort of to my why in a way. It was a personal challenge. And so I started it with no long range plan. And here we are, 6.5 years, 650 or so episodes, 1.4 million downloads. I mean, and we're still going. And I don't know where it goes from here. Does it just go on forever? Do I sell it at some point? Do I just stop it? I have no idea.
It is a strange world, the podcasting world. And
Yeah.
but when you feel that your services are being received well, and clearly they are, because with that many downloads and that many episodes, and also for yourself, you're obviously exploring different avenues, and it's a constant learning for yourself as well.
Yeah, it's the relationships with both the guests and the audience. I mean, it's profound. I mean, I can't say enough about podcasting. It's so incredibly intimate. It's given me a chance to share thoughts and a platform and my values in a very intimate way, and people receive it really intimately. And I love, I'm very active on social media, and I love when I post that I'm going to be somewhere, perhaps for a speaking engagement or even vacation. And there will be listeners of the show that will message me and say, "Hey, could I possibly meet you while you're here?" I love that. And it just creates connections all over the world. I think the podcast is listened to in about 200 countries. Three times in the 6 years, I've been recognized by my voice, like out in the streets. I was at an ice cream parlor, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Are you the host of?" Yeah, actually, my podcast was previously called Creative Warriors. We rebranded earlier this year. And "Are you the host of Creative Warriors?" It's like, recognized by your voice. Like, that's crazy to me. I was ordering ice cream, right? Probably cookie dough. I was ordering ice cream, and based on that, they picked up the tone of my voice. Like it's crazy, crazy.
That is amazing. And that just goes to show how powerful the sort of auditory medium is, because people are taking you to all places. They are listening to you in different parts of their world. They may be hoovering, they may be washing up, they may be out running or walking the dog, but what they're hearing is 100% your voice. So they really hone in on that because they've got no other stimuli to go with.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, is hoovering vacuuming? What is that?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah,
Okay, I'm
absolutely.
thinking it's vacuuming because of the brand, but I've never heard that term. I love that. I'm going to start using that. Thank you.
Oh, it's funny, isn't it? You wear a particular brand, then becomes the actual name for
And it never has here in the
the.
US. That's what I love. I
Mm,
mean, I love Q-tip, Starbucks, I'm going to go grab a Starbucks. Like, wait a minute, you're going to get a coffee anymore. But
yeah.
Hoover has never caught on that way here. So I love that.
There you go. See, podcasting is a learning experience.
It is.
So you mentioned your values earlier. How does podcasting fold into your values?
Oh gosh. Uh, you know, one of my, and I've actually done a fair amount of work on this. So I worked with Brent Menswar, is who recently just released a book called Black Sheep. Oh my gosh, such a great read. So it's Brant Menswar. The book is called Black Sheep. Brant is a friend of mine, and he and I were on a phone call. Gosh, it has to be a year or two ago now. I don't even know, but we were having a phone call as friends do, and we're both speakers. So I had reached out to just connect about some things about around speaking, and he said something about Black Sheep that was a positive. Now, having been a creative person my whole life, having been a photographer, for 36 years now, and I'm just a creative thinker from day one. To me, black sheep had always had a negative connotation to it because I was the black sheep in my family, and I've taken polls amongst my listening audience and said, how many of you feel like black sheeps? And it's very common amongst a lot of. I actually think it's common amongst high achievers to feel like you're the black sheep in your family, like there's something so unique about you. So I've always held the idea of black sheep as a negative, but the way Brant said it, it was a positive. It's like, wait a minute, how is that a positive? And he went on to explain to me this, which I don't really want to give away because I want you to read the book, but he went on to explain how black sheep is a positive. I had never heard of it, had never heard of it that way. And all right, I guess I can summarize it. So I don't think he'll mind in the book. I'm going to tell the whole story, but basically, the wool of a black sheep can't be dyed. Okay, so if you're a black sheep, you're so authentic to who you are, you can't be changed by other people. And that is the power of the black sheep. So I said to him, Brent, you have to write that book. And he did. I was like, you have to write a book for the world that needs to understand being a black sheep is a positive because many of us think it's a negative. So he did. He went ahead, he wrote the book, and it's fantastic. And what he teaches is finding your black sheep values. Like getting to the heart of your core values, usually around, he calls them the flock of five, but 5 or 6 values that are really your core values. So I did that work with Brant. Now, mind you, at this time, I mean, I'm now 56 years old. So here I am doing this work at 54 or 55 years old. We think we know our values. I just couldn't believe that when asked, I actually didn't know. I know what I do and I know how I act and I know how to behave, but I never really, as a trained coach with more than 1,000 hours of training myself, I realized I'd never really looked at what values drive those behaviors until I did this work with Brant. And the one that really kind of, there were, like I said, there's 5, but the one that probably sits on top is acceptance. And that has a lot to do with my why. It has a lot to do with the podcast because through the podcast, I'm able to give opportunity to people who might otherwise not have a voice. And through the podcasting platform, you and I as hosts have an opportunity to let people have a voice and be heard and get their message out there. And I realize how foundational that value of acceptance is to even being a podcast host, that I want to be a part of helping people be accepted into the world, particularly if they're breaking in, if they have an innovative idea. So I would say acceptance has a lot to do with one of my other values. One of the other 5 of those values is impact. And I hold a very high, not just value, but I'll say responsibility for creating impact. We're only here for so much time. And it's important for me to have an impact. And the podcast has shocked me as to how much of an impact I've been able to make. When I started the podcast, it was a personal challenge. I wanted to stretch. I wanted to stretch into an arena that was really going to be challenging me because I had never been a host. I had never put myself out there that way. And I was in a leadership program and took on this personal challenge. And somebody in the group asked me, what would a big impact through this podcast look like? And I said, gosh, if 50,000 people a year listen to this podcast, like that would be a tremendous impact to me. And here we are 6.5 years later, and the podcast reaches 30 to 40,000 people a month. Right? I never could have imagined. So the impact is being one of my huge values is definitely also behind the podcast as well.
That's fascinating. I mean, there's so many different strands that I could pick up on there. And, being the black sheep, it's interesting about how perception is that there's always a sort of a negative connotation there. Whereas,
Mhm.
and you've obviously proved, or actually Brand has sort of proved that is not the case. And something that I want to pick up on is that quite often the things where we perceive them as being negative, actually they will have a positive side to them as well, always. And you have
Yeah.
this flip
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. I mean, that honestly, gosh, Amy, that is such a part of my work. Um, I'm often people often describe me as disruptive, and I always look at that a little sideways because I'm like, I'm not cool enough to be disruptive. Like when I think disruptive, I think torn jeans and spiked hair. Like I'm not that. But um, but I guess my views are disruptive because of that. Like I often feel like things that we're told. So I'll tell you one thing that really drives me is this idea that we're told in life to focus on one thing. We're told in business to pick a niche. And I have always hated both of those things. Absolutely hate. I mean, I have such strong resistance to, and I did as a child, I had such strong resistance to be told to focus on one thing, sit still. And I wanted to scream as a little kid. It's like, you're shutting me down. Like, that's not who I am. And I don't understand how in a world where, we tell people to sit down, focus on one thing, where we're shutting down the people who actually see more, hear more, and feel more, right? When I walk down the street, I take it all in. Like I'm seeing and hearing. I mean, the third of my five values is ultimate. I called it gratitude. And I say ultimate because it was a very iterative process of naming these values. And it was originally called beauty. And sometimes I feel like I should go back to beauty, but gratitude is underneath it. So I went with gratitude. And what that means to me is, as a photographer, I don't not see anything. I just don't. I see it all. I see what other people don't see. I see beauty in things that other people don't see beauty in. I see an image. I see a composition where other people don't see it. That's just ingrained in me. That's why I became a photographer. So, lack of focus, I'm just taking in life. I'm taking it all in. I'm seeing all that beauty. So, I have always had such a strong resistance to being told to focus on one thing. And then, of course, you go into business, and the whole business world tells you the riches are in the niches. You have to focus on one thing. And I'm saying, but I can't, and I don't want to. I don't see the benefit of focusing on one thing because I have a lot to give. I have a lot that I can see how my core skill set and my why, I can see how that applies in as spokes in many different areas. Why do I have to pick one? So ultimately, but at the same time, I recognize that you can't be successful in business if you're running all over the place and if you're changing direction. So I get it. I get the practicality of the advice, but decided it's just taught all wrong. It's spoken about all wrong. And really what it is that your niche per se is what's inside you. Your niche is the work to be done is to find out what is your unique perspective. How is it that you see what you do differently than everybody else? Because none of us, hardly any of us, are in a field all by ourselves. But what I can say is that everybody has a unique perspective, because your unique perspective is a combination of your life story, your education, your relationships you've been in and out of that you've learned from. It's everything packaged together ends up giving you a unique way to look at what you do. Like I have a unique way of looking at focus that other people don't have, that don't share that. And so our niche, if you will, is within us as to how we look out. And then from there, there are multiple people that could be served with that, and you can deliver that content in multiple ways. It's what I call a business model of multiples. So I feel like the whole world has it backwards. The whole world is telling people to focus on one thing and pick a niche from outward in. And I was like, no, actually, it's an inward out process. It's finding your niche within yourself for which there are multiple audiences and multiple ways in which you can deliver that. I look at the Italian Renaissance and wonder what happened. Where did we go from the Italian Renaissance to here when artists were revered for their multiple talents? And now we live in a world where everybody's telling us to pick one thing. And I feel like we're stifling a lot of amazing creative minds. So how did we go on that rant?
Well, what I'm hearing and seeing, and because I can see you, but obviously the audience can only hear, but there's a sensory overload that's going on here. And if you're seeing and feeling and having all of these different senses being sort of on alert at all times, how do you then, as a photographer, communicate that as one dimension?
I honestly think it comes down to the core meaning of your show. It's your why, right? I mean, a quote, it sounds so ridiculous. It's a quote of my own, but it's a great quote. So I'm happy to share it. But it was my answer to that, which is you can wear 1,000 hats if they all hang on one hook, right? I mean, I navigate between many things in the course of a day, but I'm always directed by a why. I won't say the why because I think there are multiple whys and I think there are layers to a why. But there's something almost indefinable, although I've done the work to try to define it. But there's something that is so core to everything that for me, the navigation between the things is easy. All the sensory, I don't have, I don't see it as sensory overload. It's because it's not an overload to me. And that's the difference. When you've got your why, when you know that hook, when you know what all your hats are hanging on, it isn't an overload. It may look that way to others, which I actually find amusing. People are like, oh my gosh, you get so much done. You're all over, even if it's a compliment. Some people will say, my gosh, it looks like you're all over the place. Other people say, I don't know how you do it all. I'm like, it's easy. Like it's just all hanging on one thing. I can switch in a day's time. I can literally switch from being a photographer to being a speaker to being an author to being a consultant. Like sometimes in one day I have to play all those roles. And when you know why that's driving all that, it's just me changing my outfit from a cape to a suit. It's just your Superman routine. You're just changing maybe the exterior to fit the role, but what's inside never changes.
So what's embedded inside for you?
So as I said, I really do think that there are layers of whys, because there are some days I wake up and my why is solely focused on the people I'm serving and driven by a more surface level why to make sure that they're seen in the world. That's what I do as a brand message consultant, right? So I refer to myself as a small business consultant, but because I like to, that's my role. My role is to help small businesses, particularly self-employed, in the entire ecosystem of their business. I have a specialty in brand messaging because that's what my previous book, Lingo, was all about. It's about how to understand the lingo of your ideal customers so that you can then create brand messaging that speaks their lingo. And they feel like you end up feeling like you're in your own world together because you get them so well and you're speaking the same lingo. Lingo holds communities together. Ancient communities have had a lingo. I'm always fascinated by twins. Twins, as toddlers, will have their own lingo. They totally get each other, but nobody else knows what they're saying, right? So lingo as a heartfelt way of communicating, when it's emotionally based, lingo holds communities together. So I definitely have an area of specialty in brand messaging. So on any given day, my why is to help my clients to be seen as both a brand, but ultimately the way that brands are seen is because they've made their customers feel seen. So, I'm kind of vacillating, if you will, between helping those two entities, both the brand, the company, and their customer, because I need to stand in the shoe of their customers to be that customer, to say, what do I need to see, hear, and feel from this brand in order to choose them? And then I distill that information and help the brand create the messaging to that customer. And that has a lot to do with who I am as a photographer, because I'm kind of literally, as a photographer, I'm used to being on both sides of the lens, right? In order to be a good photographer, you have to understand the people you're photographing. You have to be in their shoes, if you will, and understand the dynamics of that person, that family that you're composing. So being on both sides of the lens is easy for me. So that's, on a daily basis, that's my why. I think there's a layer underneath that, which really is about making people feel seen. I feel very strongly that, as I was saying earlier about acceptance, that people, I strive to help people feel seen and accepted in the world. Uh, and I make political decisions. I make decisions based on those values. How I exercise my right to vote, and what policies that I will choose are always based first and foremost on what are going to make people feel seen, make people feel accepted. I want a more inclusive world. So, I think that drives a lot of my work. But then there's, I think, a layer of why underneath that, which starts getting a little more core. And you and I have spoken before about the five whys. And I don't know that, five whys is sort of an Eastern philosophy of asking yourself five layers of whys. I don't know that it has to be five, but I think for me, underneath the why of making people feel seen, underneath that is a pretty heavy trigger point for me that I do know is a big part of my why. And as you'll see, there's sort of a thread to all of this, but it's about being overlooked. So that's a huge emotional trigger point for me. The reason is I have lived on both sides of that being overlooked. As a child, well into my 20s, I was extremely shy. So I wanted to be overlooked. I prayed nobody would notice me. I hid in the back of the line, always, under any circumstances. I always chose the corner seat everywhere, or as a kid in the cafeteria. I actually didn't even go to the cafeteria. I went to the guidance office because I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to be overlooked. Please don't notice me. That was kind of my total drive in life, which is painful when you're in school because teacher's going to call on you. But my entire life was about, please don't notice me. I wanted to be overlooked until you decide you want to have a bigger impact in the world. And I had that moment of realizing that I wanted to serve the world in a bigger way. And I couldn't do that by not being seen. So I had to step forward and become a professional speaker and create this podcast. That was the challenge behind the podcast. Like, let me try to be seen here and see what happens. So of course, the other side of wanting to be overlooked is hating being overlooked. So now it's a big trigger point for me when I feel overlooked, when I'm like waving my hands to get a certain speaking gig and nobody notices, or the 13 or 12 times it took me to submit to get a TEDx talk before on the 13th attempt, I finally got chosen to be a TEDx speaker. And other people around me were getting chosen easily. I'm like, I know that I'm better at this than them. Like, I know that I have better content, So wanting to be overlooked wound up becoming a huge emotional trigger that I hate being overlooked. That's that is probably one step away from the absolute core why, because I hate seeing people get overlooked. I fight to make sure people aren't overlooked. And it is a driver behind those more surface level whys of brand messaging, helping businesses not be overlooked, helping self-employed and entrepreneur people not be overlooked. To make sure they have the right brand messaging is driven by my own hatred for myself and seeing other people be overlooked. Right. So there are just layers and layers to this. So I think, that's the drive, but we just may not be on a daily basis. I don't know that we're always aware of the deepest why that's driving us. In a way I am, because I've done the work. But, I don't operate from that place every day, because it probably would be, talk about overload. If I worked from the place of how much I hate being overlooked or hate other people being overlooked every day, I probably would be, there's so much fight in that it probably would be a more angry existence. Right. So it's tempered down by just the passion of helping people be seen. And that's an easier existence. It's an easier layer of why to exist in, I think.
So, having spent your entire time being shy and praying no one would notice you, but at the same time noticing everything, you were saying
Mhm.
that you noticed everything. What led you to sort of step behind the lens to capture that, and then what led you? I mean, I know you said that you just a moment ago that you wanted to then flip that, but what was the driver after all of those years being behind the lens?
It's a fantastic observation that you've just made because being a photographer is innately being an observer. And I look at my years, decades of shyness as truly a blessing because when you pull back so far, what's left is observing. And now I see it as one of my greatest strengths. And it actually, in a practical sense, it's one of the ways in which as a small business consultant, I'm really helpful because I can tend to feel, and it's again, this is something I actually have probably some of the most confidence in. I can tend to feel what the market is going to need and hear before other people do. And that's a gift in business because that keeps myself and other businesses ahead. I'm extremely empathetic to the point that I can feel how the marketplace is shifting. And I will tell you, it has saved my photography business many times over the years when there's been, like we're experiencing now with this global pandemic. It enabled me to, in the past, 9/11, the Great Recession, it enabled me to see how people's values were shifting, how the world's values were shifting, which I could then shift my business and even my brand messaging to align that before people were even aware how their values shifted. So being an observer has been a huge, huge gift to my role as a small business consultant that I can give to others. Uh, I chose photography because actually it continued the model of wanting to be overlooked because especially back in the day, in the 80s when I started, the cameras were massive. So there literally was a barrier, but I could hide behind something. So it actually wasn't me stepping out. It was actually figuring out a tool in which, and obviously I had a natural talent to being a photographer, but I think I had a natural talent because I was an observer. So photography was a natural inclination. It also was back in the day of dark rooms. So literally, I chose to become a photographer because it allowed me to be overlooked. There was a barrier between me and the world in the form of a camera, and a huge part of the work was done in the dark room where I didn't have to make eye contact. Nobody would see me. So I literally chose a profession to continue the model of being overlooked. However, the irony is when you're good at something, you're thrown center stage. And that's just what happened. I mean, in high school, I started winning national and international awards. And next thing you know, my photographs were on tour throughout the country. And I had to go to a cocktail reception in New York City at a museum where one of my photographs was on display. And then I went to photography school, won every award there was, and then was chosen by the other students to be the student representative at graduation and having to give a speech. And I remember thinking to myself the whole time, it's like, well, this didn't work out as planned. Like this was supposed to keep me in the dark. And that began the transition, if you will, which still took probably another 10 years, but it became the transition to becoming comfortable with being seen until somewhere in my mid 30s, when I really got intrigued by being a coach and went to coach training and realized that if I wanted to do something in the world that had greater impact, that ultimately the shyness was selfish, that ultimately I was keeping so much into myself that I wasn't serving the world. And that's when I really started pushing myself to limits that were then extremely uncomfortable. Obviously, now I'm very comfortable being seen, very comfortable. And I think honestly, I think a lot of introverts and shy people actually are comfortable being seen. They say that they're not, but it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of introverts are really good speakers, which is very common. A lot of professional speakers are introverts. And I think part of the reason for that is we're very used to being uncomfortable. So we know how to manage the emotions of discomfort because as an introvert or shy person, you've spent a lot of your life in uncomfortable situations, what feels uncomfortable to you. But I think it also plays into, I don't want to be seen, but yeah, I kind of really do want to be seen. I don't want to be noticed. I want to be overlooked, but I kind of like the spotlight on the stage because I don't get that very often. So I think there's a little play on that, but it's still, it's still something I work with because as our roots often are always there.
And as you say, your values of acceptance and impact and gratitude, and that they are so sort of domineering that actually it pushes you into that space. And something you said right at the beginning, which was that you want to give people the opportunity of being heard, of having their voice being heard, and get their voice out there. But you didn't necessarily talk about their visibility. It was more of from having their voice, so hearing them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I vacillate between being seen and being heard, and often think of them as being two things. Excuse me, the same thing. I coincidentally just yesterday or 2 days ago, excuse me, I did a master class on how to be an awesome podcast guest, and it was put together very quickly because and I know you probably experienced this as a host yourself, that particularly under this pandemic, and because my show is popular, I am inundated by requests to be a guest on the show. And there has been, honestly, most people pitch themselves to hosts really poorly to begin with. But now the pandemic has made that an epidemic. Like I cannot, because under lockdown, businesses are seeing it as a way to promote themselves. I'm like, well, my podcast doesn't exist to promote you and your business and your technology. It doesn't even exist to promote your book. It exists to share the content of your book, which will inadvertently promote your book. But you're not coming out. But the pitches I get is basically people swinging their hands saying, pick me, promote me. I want to be on your show. And it's gotten so bad that I just decided last week to step up and say, okay, we need to fix this. Let me teach you all how to contact a podcast host, and let me teach you how to show up and be a good interview. So I did this masterclass 2 days ago, and I said repeatedly in there that my goal was to help them be heard, because I think again, going back to my core why about being overlooked, they're under the current level of noise in the world of podcasting. There are people that have tremendous value that are being overlooked. They're being over dominated by garbage. They're being dominated, as life often is. Like they're being overlooked because somebody else is louder, more aggressive. And that again gets to the heart of what I hate, because I'm looking for the needle in the haystack. Like, who's that gem that the world doesn't know about yet, but that has a life-changing, world-changing message? So I decided, let me give those people a better voice. But to me, when you give someone a better voice, when you give them the ability to be heard, you're giving them the ability to be seen. Because if I can, through podcasting, if we can give guests an opportunity to be heard and people like what they hear, that turns into more opportunities for them to be seen. So I often don't necessarily separate the terminology between being seen and being heard.
No, I get that. I think that's a good perspective to have. And I'm sitting here thinking, listening to some of the words you're using, and a lot of them are linked to photography, the focus, the filters, and the perspective.
Yeah.
How much of your photography still is a big part of what you do and who you are?
It's a huge part of who I am, and that always will be. It's not much of what I do anymore. I do, maybe 6 to 8 shoots a year for some of my very best clients. And I'm very high end in the world of photography, so that's a substantial amount of income without doing very much work. But honestly, it's more about the relationships. They're just the families that I'm not able to let go of yet. I'm still in relationship with usually the kids. It's really the kids. The parents are lovely, but I love the kids, and I'm in such a deep relationship with them. I'm not complete seeing them grow up. So there's a handful that I still do. But as far as all those metaphors that you said, honestly, it's so natural to me. It took other people pointing out to me. Again, I spoke earlier about unique perspective. As it turns out, that's my unique perspective. I have a very unique way of looking at brand messaging, and I have a very unique way of looking at my topics that I speak on from stage, which, because I'm looking through the perspective of a photographer, I'm looking at it from the perspective of being a masterful observer. I'm looking at it from the ability to look at both sides. What makes me really good at brand messaging is my ability to imagine on the subject, right? So to imagine on the customer, so that I can feel what I want to see, hear, and feel. So I think everything. I also, we've heard the thought of mastery takes 10,000 hours. I don't know how many hours it actually takes, but I mean, I've been doing this for 36 years, and it has trained my brain to work in a certain way. I see the world in pixels. I see the world in pieces. and compose. My brain is always composing things. I see still images all day, every day long. Some people see dead people. I see images, you know? But that's an incredibly valuable tool in what I do, because that's how it helps me in brand messaging, is that I tell companies when I work with them that I'm going to tear it apart. Like, I'm literally stirring up the dust and throwing it all up in the air. And especially more structured companies, that makes them really uncomfortable. But I'm like, if I throw everything up in the air, my brain will compose the messages. But I need to understand, I need to dig into the company. I need to dig into the customers. I need to understand their psychology, their emotions, what makes them tick. It makes people so uncomfortable when I throw everything up in the air, because in my meetings and I warn them, I mean, my meetings are all over the place. Like, there is nothing linear about this. I love Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, had a quote that said, uh, chaos creates a dancing star, something like that. And, all creativity exists in chaos. So I create a lot of chaos and just let my brain do its thing. And it has a huge amount to do with who I am as a photographer, because my brain composes things. So what makes other people uncomfortable and makes me, that's my sandbox. So without a doubt, I mean, having been a photographer all those years, and just photography being the natural extension of that shy kid who wanted to be overlooked, it's just trained my brain to think differently, be highly sensitive, see life from both sides of the lens, so that I'm always empathetic to the other side. I see privilege where it exists, and I know what it feels like to be on the other side of that. I mean, everything in my life has pointed to that one thing about being on both sides of the lens. I grew up very lower middle class, and wound up serving the wealthiest people in the United States as their photographer. I grew up incredibly shy, and now I can be on a stage of thousands of people. To be honest with you, even right down to the fact, I mean, I was married for 19 years, raised 3 kids, divorced 5 years later, came out as a gay man. Right. So I literally has lived life on opposite sides. And when I came out, marriage rights and equality didn't exist in the US. And I remember thinking how odd it was, by a decision of who I chose to love, I was no longer seen as the same American. And yet I was the same person. I had the same values. I raised my kids the same way. And it's things like that you realize the value of living a life on both sides of the fences, because I know what it feels like to, be in a minority. I know what it feels like to have the Supreme Court make decisions about whether you deserve to be treated fairly compared to everybody else. Based on what? Based on, like I said, I'm the same guy I was before I came out in so many ways. So that living life on both sides of the lens is a huge gift. So like I said, to answer your question, being a photographer it's just who I am, not even by trade, but I'm an observer. And whether I'm observing through a lens or observing through brand messaging, it's just all a tool.
And you mentioned earlier about the Renaissance and being an incredible time of being able to have lots of different ways of living and lots of different opportunities there, and seeing that you can see the future in terms of what's coming next. Do you feel that this opportunity that we've had as a global pandemic gives us that opportunity for another Renaissance?
I really do. I think I honestly, and I know I'm an eternal optimist, but I love where humanity is going. I mean, I think with the gift of having been on Earth for a certain period of time, and in that time having been in business for 37, I'm 56. I've been in business for 36 years of that. By the age of 20, I was a registered business and professional photographer. 36 years and what I say often about being self-employed is that it's personal development on steroids, because you're going to see and you're going to experience everything at such a fast pace that I've lived 5 lives in a single life, because I've been self-employed for so long. I've actually never had a job. I've never received a paycheck. I at 14 years old decided I need to, because I was so shy and wanted to be overlooked. I decided at a very young age, at around 14, that I would never have a job, because who would hire me? I felt completely unemployable because I didn't think I had any value to anybody else. So therefore, buckle up, young kid. Like, you're gonna have to take care of yourself. So self-employment to me, I just said, I'm gonna forge my own path here, because I didn't see that I had any value to somebody else as far as why they would hire me. I didn't see career opportunity because of where I came from and where I grew up. I didn't see education opportunity in front of me. Um, so, I decided to become self-employed. But what I can tell you over these 36 years of living on steroids, being self-employed, is that I've seen humanity shift in so many ways, and I continue to love where it's going. And one of the ways, just in a practical sense in business, which is a big part of how I help businesses to understand that people today make an energetic decision about who they do business with. It wasn't that way in the 80s and 90s. People decided who they did business with because it was the cachet company. It was the brand. And I built my entire business on that. Jeffrey Shaw, as the photographer, was entirely built like the Ralph Lauren model. Like I turned myself into a label. I turned myself into the it guy for rich people. Like, you needed to hire me to photograph you because I was the it guy. I had a label. And it was very intentional. I knew exactly what I was doing. That's why my business was in my name. Um, and then you start realizing the world is shifting. And thankfully, that didn't matter as much. What mattered more than anything is whether you were good at what you did. And then it shifted again to where I think we're more today is like, yeah, I don't even care about how good you are at what you do. I care about who you are as a brand. I care about what you stand for. I care about your why as a company. And then I'll decide whether I'm going to do business with you or not. And if I don't like your values as a brand or company, I'm going to drop you. Right. So we now exist in a world where consumers are deciding who to do business with based on how they feel energetically about the company. And I love that. So now this pandemic comes along and it is, I mean, I post after post on social media, I see people posting things like, again, I'm in a world of professional speakers who many professionals way ahead of me get paid, boatloads of money for a single gig and have done, 100 to 125 gigs a year. And they're used to being on the road all the time. And now they're not. And I see them posting things like, I love what I do. I love being on stage. I love interacting, but I don't know that I want to do it as much in the future because now I've had a chance to be home. I've had a chance to steer my life differently. And I actually refer to this time in which we're in as the great realization. We've had, and there's a wonderful video circulating on YouTube called The Great Realization. But I feel like we've had the Great Depression, we've had the Great Recession, and I think finally we're having the Great Realization, where people are realizing what really matters. I often look at the fact that we have to be so maniacal about our cleanliness these days and wash our hands. I feel like the whole world is doing a walking meditation. Because you know what, Amy? I've always been that way. I've never touched elevator buttons. I don't let my hands go near the handles on an escalator because it's disgusting. I don't think they're ever cleaned. I don't have a phobia about germs, but again, as an observer, I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves is you can go to the nicest of restaurants with a beautiful linen tablecloths and a beautiful table setting, and they come along and they lay this beautiful leather-bound menu on the plate. And I've actually made them take plates away and said, I don't know where that menu has been. You've just laid it on where my food is going to go. And we've been accepting this. We've been accepting the behavior of hotels and airlines all this time, even if whether you noticed it or not. I noticed it all because it's all gross to me. And now everybody's noticing it. And I'm like, it's like everybody's doing a walking meditation. And I love that. So I think there's a level of awareness and consciousness coming into the world. I mean, we're conscious of what we're touching. If that isn't walking meditation, I don't know what is. So I think it's an incredibly beautiful, profound time, while at the same time, my heart aches, absolutely aches for the struggle of small businesses, the struggles of individuals, the loss what breaks my heart more than anything are people that are dying from this horrid virus that are alone, and family members that can't be with them. And, you know, again, back to acceptance. I have such a deep passion for what that must feel like because I also watched during the AIDS crisis when, because there wasn't marriage equality, gay men and women who had been together for decades weren't allowed to be with their partner in their last moments because the hospital policy was only family members, and that their partner of 25 years wasn't considered a family member because there weren't rights and laws that were passed. I can't have that. And now I feel like we're seeing the same thing in COVID for different reasons, but the feelings and the values tie in for me. And so as often there is when there's a great realization, when there's an awakening, when there's a higher level of consciousness on the other side, there's a great pain because birthing is not easy. And a lot of people are going through severe pain. Other people are going through incredible clarity. And we have both. And life is full of polarities. And that's just the reality of life. But I believe wholeheartedly the outcome is going to be just incredible because I crave a world of higher consciousness. And if right now if being aware of what we touch as a walking meditation is a tool of consciousness, then so be it, because I think that's going to translate into people being so much more aware of the people around them that it can lead to a better world.
Well, it's been a masterclass of observations in this podcast today. I really feel like there's been a fantastic circular structure at play where we started off with the polarities and we've ended up there again, which has been incredible.
My next book is about polarities, by the way. So I've been playing with them my whole life because I think I always say the answer to life is reasoning what appear to be opposites.
Yeah.
The polarities exist, and the sweet spot is being able to reason what's in between them. So it's always intrigued me.
And also both will always serve you in different ways. And it's
Absolutely.
looking to see how, particular circumstances have served you when you probably didn't think it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And as you say, all those years of being overlooked actually served you incredibly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today and hearing your sort of viewpoints. And I feel like I've got a different lens on today. I really do. I really feel like I've been able to sort of just put on the Jeffrey Shaw glasses and see through a different filter today. It's been incredible. How would people get in contact with you, Jeffrey?
My website is jeffreyshaw.com. That kind of leads everywhere. I even for the first time on that website, which has recently been relaunched, I actually have an about page. I never had an about page before because I felt like I'm a personal brand. What more do you need to know? But because of the work I did around my values, I did an about page based on my values, and I explain each of my 5 core values. I also share organizations that I give money to because I feel like the best way to really get to know somebody, what they're really about is what they value, what they support, what they prioritize. So I share my values, I share what I support, and I also share what I prioritize in life. And if that's not going to tell you everything that there is to know about me, I don't know what else is.
Well, added to that, your podcast, which has got a huge resource, and I'm sure of plenty of things that you can share with them. So, and today's podcast as well. So thank you so much. Have you got a final word for today, please?
My final word would be that there are layers to the why. And I would encourage everyone, because I've done this work myself, is to consider the 5 whys. It's like, well, why is that important to you? Well, why is that important to you? And why is that important to you? And layer it down so that you can operate and vibrate at each of those whys. And to me, again, I think this is also misunderstood. It's not drilling down to that strongest core why, just so you're only going to work from that place. It's knowing that at any time you can work, come from, and vibrate from any of those 5 whys, because they each have a different purpose. I mean, like I said, if I worked from my core why every day, I probably would be too passionate. All right. But there's a place for that. There's a time when that needs to come up because I need to fight for what I think is right for myself or for other people. So I find it to be a helpful tool to have multiple whys and just know from which I am passionately working from.
Thank you for listening to the Focus on Why